Lessons learned from the first black general in special forces. Let's go. What's going on? What's going on? It's your boy, Storyteller Jet, with another episode of the That's So Fire talk show. And today I have the very first U.S. Air Force,
Army.
Special Forces. That's where I was headed with that. Here in the studio, and we're going to be talking about some of the biggest lessons that he's learned through his 29 years career. Some of the lessons learned, failure, success, you name it. So you're going to be in for a treat today. Welcome, General. How are you doing today?
Jet, I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. And I am ready to impart my knowledge to all your folks out there.
Let's go. That's going to be fire. So the first question that I have for you is, who is General Remo Butler?
General Remo Butler, and I tell people all the time, I'm an old country boy from Mississippi. I didn't see my first flush toilet until I was 5 years old. Grew up in rural Mississippi and surrounded by family. The lessons I learned gave me a great foundation because family is very important. Self-sufficiency is also very important, and learning to think on your own is important. Those are the things that I learned as a small child growing up in Mississippi, and that made me who I am today.
That's fantastic. We'll kind of talk a little bit about each one of those things that you mentioned, because I think it's important for people to learn as well. But that is a great story, like from being the very first black general in special forces. Right. How did you get to that level? Like, give me the origin story. Like,
well, let me tell you, and people don't like to hear this sometimes. I got there by hard work. My father always told me when I was growing up, to be successful, you're going to have to be twice or three times as good as that other guy you're working with. As I started my career in the military, I knew that, and I was good. But even though I was good, sometimes people would rank you behind someone else. Fine, what do? You could either give up or push harder. I pushed harder. I also learned do the hard jobs, because many people don't want to do the hard jobs. They want to take the easy way. And the easy way is fine, but you're not going to make a name for yourself. When you do the hard jobs and you make your boss look good, you hear me? Your boss looks good, so he's happy. So your boss loves you. So this happens, and your boss makes sure that he takes care of you, puts you in the right position to be successful. Also, your boss is leaving, but he knows you're a great worker. Now, I guarantee your boss got friends out there. And your boss, if he's smart, he's going to be on the phone. He's going to call you and say, Jet, I got this guy named Butler over here. Man, this guy is good. He is great. I'm getting ready to leave. Do you want him? And you'll say, yeah. Then he will send me over for my interview with you. You'll say, yeah, I'll take it. And then I'll continue to do the hard jobs for you, make you look good.
Or even take over for the boss. Like, it will be a great recommendation if you're doing a great job. It means like he can promote you from within before he left.
Well, you can't do that in the military because there's a rank structure. And there's a thing called time and grade. You have to have so much time. So like when a battalion commander recommends a captain, that captain can't go to battalion commander. The captain will get a job commensurate with his rank or one higher. And that's about it. So he could be the XO or the S3 for the battalion. And I was in that situation. I was a captain, and I was an S3 in a Special Forces battalion.
Wow. Yeah. So how did you decide that you wanted to get involved in the military?
I didn't decide. It happened. I graduated from college in 1974. And there was a recession going on. And I looked around and I saw guys that I knew in college who were smarter than me. And they ended up graduating, working in Sears. One guy, I remember, he worked at Sears selling shoes with a master's degree.
Wow.
And at that time I said, I got to find something else. Well, ROTC instructor came down looking good, uniform on, looking sharp. And they said, if you join ROTC, we'll give you $50 a month. Oh, I was sold. Back in 1974, $50 was a little bit of change.
Yep.
So I went to ROTC, and initially I had, I call it that street attitude. Well, these guys ain't gonna tell me what to do. Eventually, though, I learned, and I started doing what I was supposed to do. So I finished ROTC, graduated, and got commissioned in the Army as a lieutenant in 1974 in field artillery. And I looked at it as a stepping stone. And a lot of more people should look at the military as a stepping stone. I went in and I said, okay, I'm going to go in the military and I'm going to do 3 or 4 years. I'm going to get out. I'll have some experience, seen the world a little bit, made a few dollars, and I'll do something different. And that was my goal. Well, after about year 2, I went to Fort Hood, Texas. And it was a good place. I had a great commander. And he listened to me. And he, moved me along. And I started out as a mortar platoon leader. Next thing I was his XO. And I did that. Why? Because I did the hard work. I put in the extra hours. And he appreciated that. So he rewarded me for that. And as I stayed in, I looked around, got a new commander. And he told the old commander, hey, this guy is good. Well, the new commander happened to be a Special Forces guy, retired. Well, he was in Vietnam in Special Forces. And he came to me one day and he said, you know what? You need to go Special Forces. We need people like you. I was a young lieutenant. I said, okay, how do I do it? He said, fill out a 4187. So I went in, filled out the paperwork, sent it forward. And I was down in the motor pool one day, slim, good looking and happy. And my boss came in. He was a colonel, lieutenant colonel. And one of the guys said, sir, Colonel's looking for you. And I'm like, what the hell is he looking for me? Why ain't doing that? So anyway, I went and found him. He looked at me and he said, what are you doing? I said, sir, I'm here wearing the motor pool. Yeah, he held up that 4187. And he said, what is this BS? I said, I want to go. You don't want to go to Special Forces. You need to stay here. You're going to be a good officer, and you're going to be a company commander. And he tore it up in front of me. And I went that evening and saw my commander, and I said, hey, sir, Colonel tore up my 4187. He said, ooh, that's bad. He said, but don't worry, because he was Special Forces guy. He knew the branch chief, because he was Special Forces. So he called the branch chief, told him about me. The branch chief called me up, and he asked me one question. And this is because a lot of black folks can't swim. He said, can you swim? I said, yeah. You think you could do 100 meters in fatigues and boots? I said, yeah. Okay, you'll have orders. So they sent me the orders, and about 3 months later, I was going to Special Forces school.
Wow.
And, like I said, the colonel wanted to keep me because I was good. I knew what I was doing, and I was making everybody look good, including myself, but I was being rewarded for it. So that's why I stayed. I went to Special Forces, the same deal. I took the hard jobs. I worked the long hours, and I progressed up. People liked me. People wanted me to work for them because I made them look good. Yeah. And anytime you make your boss looks good, he's going to look out for you most times.
Absolutely. You touched on something very important, and I want to, kind of pull a little thread on that. So I do not know how to swim. So my question for you, why do you think so many black people don't know how to swim?
It's an environment thing. And I'm going to give you an example. Before we have a Special Forces selection, when I commanded the schoolhouse, I'd go out, and there'd be 500 or 600 guys wanting to be Special Forces. Well, the first thing we gave them was a PT test, physical training test, and a swim test. And there were some minority guys, looked like they were born in the gym. Looked like they ate tree bark for breakfast. And I watched them. They killed it. They killed the PT test. Then they took them over to the pool for the swim test. Most of them went to the bottom like a rock. Boom! And, they'd get out sad, and blah, blah, blah. And I talked to my sergeant major and some other retired guys there, and I said, what do we do? I said, these guys could make it. So we changed the order. So what we did was we brought guys in. We gave everybody the PT test and swim test. If you fail the swim test, we would let you go through assessment selection, which was a 30-day hell. I mean, if you made it through that, you were good. And the guys, majority of them made it through. So what we did was we brought them back in 2 weeks before the Q course started and gave them a really extensive swim training. I mean, they started in the morning, they finished at night. And the majority of them, when it was time for the real test, they passed it. And the other thing about that, they had a higher selection rate than everybody else because they really, really wanted it. And one day, one guy came in my office, and, people always like it the way it is. And he said to me, sir, I got to talk to you. I said, yeah, there's a swim test. I said, what about it? Why these guys, you get here, they should know how to swim. And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Where are you from? He told me. I said, can you dunk a basketball? Sir? Can you dunk a basketball? No, sir, I sure can't. I said, well, the majority of these guys can dunk a basketball. And he's looking at me. Where's this going? I said, you know why? No, sir, I don't. I said, in their neighborhoods where they grew up, there was usually basketball courts. I said, but there were no swimming pools. There were no ponds to swim in. I said, you know, you had your grandfather's pond to swim in. That's how you learned. I said, when you're living in a city, in a projects, there's no pond. And usually there's no pool near. He kind of thought about it, and he said, yeah, I guess you're right. But that's the reason we brought him back. Now, when you look at that, Special Forces is very small. And I was talking to one of my sergeant majors when I did that, and we figured out that every year we brought in about 8 to 12 guys that wouldn't have made it before. Mm-hmm. In the big picture, that don't look like much, but that's a half of an A team. You know, and if you do that, you're bringing, especially when the force is small, you're bringing in more people.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the biggest lesson from that specifically? Like, you know,
you have to, sometimes we set standards and we have to adapt. Times change. And when you realize something, you have to look at it, analyze it, take advantage and say, okay, this is why this is happening. I'm going to fix this problem. And you have to go ahead and fix it. And usually once you fix a problem, people say, oh, this works. Everybody loves it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you have to take that step back and really think about the overall picture, why this is happening, and coming up with a solution for that. That's great. So forgive me, what is the difference between, this is for me mostly, what is the biggest difference between Special Forces and the other part of the military?
Special Forces is a very small organization, and they receive tremendous training. The regular Army, infantry soldiers receive good training. But in Special Forces, you have an A team, which is the base. In that team, you got 2 demo men, 2 medics, which are almost as good as doctors, 2 engineers, 2 commo men, and 2 weapons men. These guys have the capability to go out, teach other people their skill set. So you go out with 12 guys, and you go and you work with 112 guys. After a certain amount of time, those 100 guys will be trained, well-trained, good enough to go ahead and do operations. And that's the biggest difference. The regular Army doesn't do that. That's Special Forces.
Cool. When you say Special Forces, Chuck Norris comes to mind. And I've obviously grew up watching a bunch of those kind of, movies and stuff like that. Are those movies that Chuck Norris basically created showcase a little bit about what Special Forces really do?
It's Hollywood. That's all I can say. It's Hollywood. It's kinda, but not really.
Yeah.
And Sylvester Stallone, with the Rambo, same thing. Kinda, but not really.
Yeah. Cool. So now let's talk a little bit about your journey from, being in the Special Forces. Can you share with me a little bit about some of the hardship that you faced while you were going through training, or going through your 29 years of service?
Training was very, very intense. I mean, it challenged you physically, and it also challenged you mentally. When I went to my first assignment, 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group in Panama, 1977. The Army was different back then. A lot of folks coming in from Vietnam. And alcohol loosens people's tongues. And I went there and, did what I needed to do. And you'd go to a party, and some of these guys would be, as they say, knee-walking, commode-hugging drunk. And they like to use the N-word. And I didn't like that word. And I would crack you. And I remember one time we were at a get-together, and everybody was drinking, and this guy came over to me and put his arm around me. I knew him. And he was happy and smiling and said to me, he said, "Sir, do you mind if I call you N-word?" Pow! Yeah, I mind. And, people came over and they couldn't understand it. So one day we were playing flag football, and we had a guy, I'll never forget this guy, big guy, from West by God, Virginia. And he was there, and he was the quarterback, and he looked around and he said, "We're going to run an N-word go long." Man, I cracked him. And they broke us up, and I'll never forget this one old master sergeant, good guy, good friend, pulled me apart. He said, "What's wrong?" I said, "He said N-word." This is no lie. He looked at me and he said, "He didn't call you one." It didn't matter. But that was the attitude. And that attitude reigned as long as people accepted that. Well, once they found out that I wouldn't accept that, they stopped using that word around me. So the military was a little bit different back then. And as you go through, you're going to have trials and tribulations. There were some folks who didn't like me because I looked like me. There were some people there who didn't like me because, I was a captain or a major or whatever. And I'll never forget, I was the only military school I ever failed was scuba school. But I went to scuba school. And the first day there, I was lined up with everybody else. There was about 15 guys there lined up because I had passed pre-scuba. And the sergeant walked up and looked at me and looked at his roster and looked at me again. He said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Sergeant, isn't this scuba school?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, that's what I'm doing here." He kind of looked at me like, what the heck's going on? But anyway, and this was a challenge that you had to get over. Now, there were other minority officers there, and they handled the situation different than I did. They were very accepting. They'd laugh it off. And, that's the way you got respect. I got respect. They got laughter. And I remember one guy told my wife at the time, he said, "You need to tell him to stop fighting. He's going to get thrown out." She said, "You tell him." But when you do that, you're letting people know I'm no joke. You want a toy, go to the store and buy one. I'm not it. So you had to get through that. But then the Special Forces team, once they accepted me, I was good as gold. And I had an old team sergeant who died not too long ago. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Lieutenant," like it was a bad word. He said, "I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to give you a choice." I said, "Yes, Sergeant." He said, "You can either sit down and listen and learn, or you can think you're in charge and get fired." I said, "Well, Sergeant, I want to listen and learn." And that was all it took. I mean, they took me under their wing, taught me everything. And back in those days, we had IG inspections and so forth, and RTEPs. We had an RTEP coming up, which is big. You failed an RTEP, bud, your career was ruined. So my team sergeant said to me, he said, "I'm going on leave next week." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute. We have an RTEP next week." He said, "You got it?" I wasn't sure myself, but they had been teaching me for over a year, but I wasn't sure. And he told me, he said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "I got to sit here and so, and they're going to look out for you." I said, "Okay." So I went on and we took the RTEP and they looked out for me. I mean, they let me do it. And if I was going the wrong way, they said, "Oh, go this way." And they let me do it. But I learned from that. And at the end of the day, we passed that RTEP with flying colors. And you know what that did? That gave me a whole heap of self-confidence because I knew I could do it. But that's the way you learn.
Absolutely. For anybody watching this that might be struggling with, gaining confidence, what advice would you give them?
To gain confidence, the first thing you have to do is have faith in yourself. Also, you have to know your job. Because if you don't know your job, you can't have confidence. But if you know your job and you know yourself and you say, "I'm going to do this," you got all the confidence in the world. Sometimes, people say I'm overconfident because I have a lot of faith in myself.
Boom. I love that. So what did it take for you to become the first Black African-American general in the Special Forces?
Okay, first thing, I don't like that term African-American. I like Black. I'm an American, but I'm Black. And I'll tell you why. Most Black Americans haven't been to Africa. I've been to Africa. I've been to South Africa. I've been to Ethiopia. Been to Kenya, Djibouti. I've been out there. Been to Africa. They really don't care for Americans. To be perfectly honest with you. Mm-hmm. They accept you, but they don't care. So for me, I'm an American, but I happen to be Black. Easy. Now, I tell people that all the time. And, that's a decision that a person has to make on their own. Yes, I'm Black. I'm an American. Okay, that's fine. Drive on.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I'm originally from Haiti, so sometimes I just kind of, because obviously African-American, that's a term that I've learned when I moved from Haiti to here. Mm-hmm. Again, thank you for sharing your perspective on that as well. But I'm going to rephrase that question again. What did it take for you to become the first Black general?
It took hard work. And as you said, it took confidence. And let me tell you, one of the reasons we don't get promoted is we don't get the right jobs. And if you don't get the right jobs, guess what? You're not going to get promoted. Sometimes, like I said, you work hard, you got a good boss, he will give you the right job. But sometimes people don't want to give you the right jobs. And I was very vocal. So if there was a job opening coming up that I thought I could do, I could do, I would go to whoever the commander was, and I'd say, hey, sir, this job you got, I'm interested in it. And I would look him dead in the eye and say that. Now, it was up to him to tell me why he didn't want me to, or I wasn't qualified. And you know what? Nobody ever told me that. Because they knew when I asked the question, they knew I was confident. They knew I could do the job. But a lot of times people put, let's just say, people they prefer or people they like in those jobs. And we don't get them all. Yeah. Sometimes, and I'll give you an example, I tried to help a couple people. And I called one guy up and I said, listen, I'm the Battalion 3. I'm getting ready to take command next week. And the commander is looking for another 3. And I'm going to recommend you. And he told me, he said, no, don't do that. I got a good job here. You know, I leave, I go home about 3 o'clock. He didn't want the job because it entailed hard work. It entailed long hours.
Yeah. What advice would you give to anybody watching this that is doing the bare minimum?
I would tell you, if you're doing just the bare minimum, you need to quit. If you don't do the hard jobs, you're not going to be recognized and you're not going to be promoted. I mean, if I had $1 for everybody, I would say, what do you do? Oh, I'm getting over it. You're not getting over it. You might think you're getting over it. You might be getting over it for the next 30 minutes, but long range, you're not going anywhere because somebody is always looking at you, especially when you look like us. Somebody is always looking because they want to catch you doing something wrong. You can't afford that. You got to work hard. You got to do hard. And the other thing is, I tell people, don't let everybody know your personal life. You know, a lot of people get on Instagram and FaceTime and this, that, and the other, and they put this foolishness out there. Well, guess what? They got people in organizations who sit in little dark rooms and they search for your information. And I remember I used to box professionally, and I didn't tell everybody. And I went to work for a company. And what happened was they offered me a job and they didn't want to give me the right money. So I left D.C. I came home. I told the guy, I said, let me tell you what I'm getting ready to do. I said, I'm getting ready to take my big fat black butt on this plane. I'm going home. Bye. So I came home. I told my wife what happened. And she was nervous. I said, don't worry, they're going to call me back. Well, a couple days later, the CEO called me back, wanted me to come back to D.C. So I flew back to D.C. And we chit-chatted. And he shook my hand and he said, wow, you got a grip like a boxer. I was confused. Okay. And I asked, and you know, basically they had this little room and they had all these guys on these computers figuring out what you did on the internet. You know, did you one of these people that had, you know, porn? You know, were you into this? Were you into that? And, you know, a lot of times, especially minorities, we get these crazy surnames on the internet. You know, get a regular name. You don't need to be, you know, Big Booty Judy. You know, be something else because that's very unprofessional. Yeah. And you got to remember, when you get into business, somebody is always there with their eyes on you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't understand it. Like a lot of those people, they create those like crazy surname and putting that on you know, social media. Yeah. Like, what is that gonna help you with?
Exactly.
Like I have somebody that like completely changed their name completely, like to something that I don't even recognize, and I'm not like I don't. Like they friended me, like I'm not gonna accept that friendship because I don't know who you are. I don't know. They don't even have like a good picture on their page. So that's very important, for sure. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned over your 29 years experience in the Special Forces?
How to deal with people. You know, that's an art because every person is different. And if I got 10, 15, 20 people working for me, I got to figure out each person's buttons because each person responds to different stimuli. Some people respond to stimuli when you say, you need to do this, this, and this. They'll do it. Others respond when you say, okay, we need to do this. So you have to figure out what each person's main stimuli is, and you have to push that stimuli. And you have to always let them know that you are working with them, for them, and that you always have their back. When the people that work for you feel that you always have their back, let me tell you what, they'll work harder for you.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your favorite deployment? Like, can you walk me through some of the
I've deployed to every country in Central America, every country in South America with the exception of Guyana, Paraguay, and Uruguay.
So have you been to Haiti?
I've been to Haiti. I worked out of the embassy in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince.
Wow, that's awesome.
And You know, I was telling them some of my best times was when I would leave the embassy compound, and they didn't like this. I would walk the streets, and I felt comfortable walking the streets because everybody was black like me. You know, and as long as I didn't say nothing, you know, okay, well, he's a fat Haitian, you know, but, you know, but other than that, you know, they didn't say nothing. So I got, you get a different environment because when you're out, there's always somebody out there that speaks English. And a guy I remember came up to me and started talking to me in English. And I said, yeah, I'm American. And we just started conversation. And, you know, that's how you learn things. That's how you connect with people.
Yeah. So which one was your favorite deployment and why was that?
My I guess, man, I had a lot of deployments. The last favorite one, I guess, was when I spent 6 months in Colombia. We were looking for those American hostages that got picked up by the FARC. And I worked for the ambassador, and I also worked with the Colombian president, his minister of defense, and the commander of his army. And it was great because I worked with some great Colombians, great people, and I got to teach them, and I got to help them do operations. And I really felt that I was contributing to the Colombian military. And that was probably the best one I'll always have great memories of.
Awesome. What is the biggest skill set that you've learned through your time in the military?
Communication with people.
And why is that?
Communication is very, very important. And to communicate with people, you can't use a pie chart. You have to change. You have to adapt to each person. You know, communicating with you is different than communicating with your brother. And I communicate with both of you. So you have to understand that, and people don't understand that. You know, you can't just be on this one plane and talk to everybody the same. You have to communicate. You have to change how you talk.
Yeah. How did you develop that communication skill, like throughout the military?
By talking to people and learning. And you know that skill happened for me after the military. And I'm gonna tell you, I worked in Iraq for about 3 years, and I worked for a big company there. And I was the deputy program general manager. And when I had my first couple of days there, we had a town hall meeting. And this old, you know, they were talking, and we had truck drivers. This was when the guys were driving fuel in Iraq. And one of the truck drivers put his hand up. And he said, well, you know, y'all back in the office, y'all don't know what we do out here. You know, y'all got that nice air-conditioned office, and we out here in this truck, blah, blah, blah. And he just went on and on. And when he finished, I said, what's your name? He said, they call me Pops. And I said, Pops, I'll tell you what, the next time you go out, I want you to let my secretary know, and I'm going with you. Man, there was a hush because nobody ever did that to him. And everybody's looking at me. So time passed, and a couple weeks or a week, lady came and said, sir, Pops said they're leaving, and they'll be here to pick you up at this time. I showed up right there, went out on the convoy, and guess what? We got ambushed. We're driving down the road. It's about 11 o'clock. I'm sitting in the truck, kind of nodding out. Boom! We flying down the road. And I remember old Pops had his hat on, man. He was shifting them gears. And we got down the road a few miles and pulled over, and everybody was fine. And the thing that made it for me, I'd never do it again. You know, in the truck, by the window, there's this frame. Well, by the door frame, there was a bullet hole. If that truck had been 100th of a second slower, it would have got me in the ear.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, the truckers, you know, they were excited. One, because I was there with them. And, you know, like I say, we're communicating on a different level than I did with my staff. And I would go out with these guys periodically, and it seemed that almost every time I went out with them, we got ambushed. So one day, one of the truckers came up to me, big guy, they called him Big Red. He said, Mr. B, you know, we appreciate you going with us. But for some reason, every time you go, we get ambushed. So obviously somebody was telling whoever it was, hey, you know, the KBR guy's going to be online with them. And, you know, they would ambush. So, you know, I stopped going out with them as much, but I would go meet up with them and talk to them. And they appreciated that because I was working with them on their level.
Absolutely. I guess a follow-up question to this is, why is communication so critical for any organizations out there?
You have to have not good, but great communication skills if you're a leader. Because one, when you give guidance, you want to make sure that your guidance is understood, not misunderstood. And when you talk, sometimes what you say can be misunderstood depending on where that person's from, how old he is, his experience level. But you got to put it in such a way where there's no mess up. They understand exactly what you're saying. And you have to change the way you use it, the way you talk to people.
Yeah. One of the biggest advice or something that somebody told me about communication is the quickest way for any organization, for someone to kill any organization is to siphon off communication.
Yeah.
So like that's the quickest way. Like if you take communication away, business
the organization is going to fall. It's going to break.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the craziest story that you have for us in your time in the military?
How about time after the military?
That would be good too.
I'm a consultant, and I consult on project development and security. And a fellow called me one day, and he said, listen, you know, my company's making money, should be making more. Can you come and check this out? I said, sure. When you go in like that, people are leery of you. They don't talk to you. But I stayed there about a week, and I did what I call leadership by walking around. And I was walking around talking to his employees, talking to them, talking to who was good, who was bad. And everybody, and once they get to know you, people will tell you the truth. And come to find out, the reason his organization was not good as it should have been was because of the people he hired in the senior positions. He had his brother-in-law or his brother as a senior vice president. He had another relative as this, another relative as that. Well, the bad thing about it was these relatives were, let's just say, abusing a lot of the female employees for their jobs.
Wow.
And I learned this. So I'd spent about 2 weeks there, so I went to him, and we sat down, and, hey, just, tell me. And I said, well, what I got to tell you, you're not going to like. He's looking at me. I said, your brother-in-law who runs this, this, and this. I said, the women that work for him hate him because he requires that they, every now and then, do sexual jobs for him.
Wow.
And he said, no, he wouldn't do that. So I'm just telling you. I said, and this guy, they're doing this, this, and this. Oh, no, I think you made a mistake. No. Now, let me tell you something. This guy here you got, he's good. He's a good guy. I said, you need to make sure you take care of him. He gave me my money, man, but he was mad. I said that, he's, okay. I guess 2 or 3 months had passed, and I was at home. I was newly married. Phone call from the guy that I told him was good. He said, hey, the boss would like to talk to you. And I said, well, look, I'm just got married here, and we'll talk later. Call me back. And I said, how long do you want me over there? I said, oh, no, I'm not coming for the 2 days. I said, man, by the time I fly there, jet lag, blah, blah. So the boss called me. He said, hey, yes, I really need to talk to you. He said, because, you're this, this, and the other, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I said, okay. So flew over with my wife and linked up with him. And he had to confess. He said, I was very angry when you left. I said, I know. He said, I couldn't believe what you said was true. He said, but it was true.
Wow.
He said, now, my brother-in-law, he said, I can't fire him because he's my brother-in-law. But you can. So basically what he did then was hired me to fire his brother-in-law and some other folks for the company.
Wow.
And, like I said, I get a kick out of that story because, it's true. Small companies try to grow up too fast sometimes. And you always have to make sure when you grow bigger, you have to make sure you have the right people, or as we say, the right cogs in the right slot.
Boom. Boom. That's awesome. So you mentioned that you were a consultant and doing all the other stuff, and that was after you
Military,
retired.
yes.
What are you doing now?
I still consult. I don't consult as much as I did before because I have a 16-year-old son, and he needs a man in his life, and I'm here. And I work out with him. We lift weights together. He's playing football. I work on his diet, and we have a great relationship. So that's why I don't consult as much anymore.
Yeah. So you've written a book called Lead from the Front.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit to me about why did you decide to write that book?
I wrote that book for a couple reasons. One part of it is I was coming up in the military. When I was a young lieutenant, there were a lot of minority officers at the lieutenant rank. As we went up higher, that pyramid went from here to here. And I would often ask myself, why is this happening? How's this happening? How's this happening? And I started paying attention to what people were doing, where they were working, how they were working. And one thing that really brought it to light, I was stationed in Panama, and they had a rift, and they had an officers club. And I remember on Fridays, on the weekends, Friday night, there were several tables full of minority officers and so forth, having a great time. And I was working, so I couldn't come every Friday night. And I was missed about a month. So I finally got loose and I went over. There was about one table of minorities. I was like, what the hell's going on? So I went and asked, I said, hey, what's happening? And he said, well, most of them got rift. I was like, what? He said, yeah. And I'm thinking, why? And one of my friends came over to me and he said, B, I'm gonna tell you why. He said, me, you, and our boy here, we the only black guys with real jobs. I was S3, he was in the 3 shop, and the other guy was a commander. He said the rest of them had bull jobs. He said so-and-so, he was in charge of the unit basketball team.
Wow.
So-and-so there, he was the commissary officer. So-and-so there, he was the PX officer. And he said, these guys were always here on happy hour. They were always getting off work. They was always at the gym, but they didn't have a real job. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, he is right. So then I started watching the progression, and I watched how many young people fell off because they didn't have the right job. Well, how do you get the right job? First off, you got to know about the right job. Many of them didn't know because they didn't have anybody mentoring them. They had nobody on the other side of the fence. And, this is a harsh thing to say, and some people will probably take offense to this. But I used to say, that in the military, most black officers can't tell you anything. But because, one, they don't communicate with the white officers. All the guys who have the jobs, who are bringing the jobs or opening the job, the majority are what? That's right. Yes.
Right.
The majority are Caucasians. They know what's going on. And this guy at this level, he's going to know, and he's going to tell his buddies at the next level. They, in turn, are going to tell their buddies at the next level. But if you don't have any buddies in the level, nobody's going to tell you jack. So the key thing is you have to establish relationships across the board, across racial lines. You have to establish bonds with these guys. You have to, instead of having 6 tables, you have to be at the table with them, because they're going to know what's coming up. I couldn't tell you how many times somebody's came to me and said, hey, Butler, look, do you know about this job coming open? No, I don't. Yeah, so-and-so got it. Why don't you go talk to him? Tell him I told you to come talk to him. We don't have that kind of established relationships. We have to learn how to make those kinds of relationships, because that's what's going to carry you across the line.
Yeah. Follow-up question to that, which would be great. Why is it important? Why is it so crucial to establish the right relationship with other people?
Because other people have knowledge. Other people know things that you don't know. And they will impart that to you if they like you, or if they care about you. Or if they don't care, they're not going to tell you anything. That's why it's critical to establish relationships across all racial boundaries.
Boom. You mentioned earlier about mentorship. Mm-hmm. Why is it important to get the right mentor?
The right mentor is going to point you in the right direction. The right mentor is going to tell you when you're making a mistake. And I was very proud when I left the military. At that point in time, I think we had about 9 or 10 black colonels. Most of them had worked for me at some point in time. I had mentored them. And, when you're mentoring a guy, it's more than just working him. You got to sit down with him one-on-one. You got to have a drink of scotch with him, smoke a cigar with him, and say, okay, what are your plans for the military? Let me show you the route you need to take. And they'll listen to that. But it's so often that people don't do that. A lot of times we get up on the side of this mountain and we look down at the peasants and we're like, we made it. I'm not helping nobody. I don't want nobody up here with me. And that's the attitude a lot of people take.
Yeah, for sure. So we started chatting about your book, Lead from the Front. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you're teaching in that book for anybody watching this?
I think the biggest lesson is a lesson in communication and a lesson in how to change systems. And what I mean by that is this. When I went to work for this big company, first day there, we had a meeting with everybody that worked for me. There was a huge table, this huge room, bigger than this. And around this table were 26 project managers. And the second and the third row were deputies. Around that table, there was nobody that looked like me except me. The second row, there were a couple people that looked like me. And I didn't say a word. I just looked and took notes. And I said, okay, why is this? Okay, again, there was nobody mentoring these folks. There was nobody helping them, pointing them to the next job. So I'm a strong believer in what we call leadership by walking around. That means you walk around, talk to people. When you do that, people become comfortable with you, and they're going to tell you stuff that normally they wouldn't tell you. So I would go out to my sites and I'd talk to guys. And I remember I went to this one site, great guy, site leader. He was telling me about it, and he was introducing me to his people. And he introduced me to this one black guy. And he said, yeah, this is, Willie. He's a great man. He does everything. He does this, that. I don't know what I'd do without Willie. Okay. So we keep going. So about a month or so later, he comes to me and he said, boss, he said, my deputy's leaving. I need somebody. I said, okay. What do you got? He said, well, I can't think of nobody, I was thinking maybe you know somebody. So I said to him, oh, you know what? What about that guy, Willie, you were talking about? Because you said this, and this about him. And he's like, well, yeah, but he's doing a great job. I said, yeah, but he'll do you a great job there too. And I said, look at it this way. Everybody on your compound will see that you promote from within. That stuck a nerve with him. And he's like, yeah, you're right. So they promoted this guy. He became the deputy project manager. And when I left, he was a project manager.
Wow.
Because he excelled. He knew what he had to do.
Yeah.
Now the thing here is when you do that with somebody, you got to make sure that it's the right guy. Because I have made that mistake and put the wrong guy in a position. Mm-hmm. And, that comes back on me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the title of the book is called Lead from the Front.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask that as a question. How do you lead from the front?
By taking charge. You're in charge. You never will ask one of your guys or gals to do something that you yourself won't do. And I'll give you an example. When I was commanding SOC South, I had SEALs. I had a SEAL platoon work for me. These guys are crazy. And once a month, they would go out and do this 5-mile run and this mile and a half, 2-mile swim. And I started doing it with them. And let me tell you what, I'd do that run and swim and come back. And for the next week, I was icing my knees. I was icing my body. But I was there with them, doing exactly what they're doing. They respected that. And I'll never forget, there was one of the guys, he made those metal, you've seen those metal bodies of people, soldiers and so forth. He made one of me.
Really?
And they presented it to me. And he said, sir, we've never had, a flag officer do this with us. And, we appreciate it. Thank you. That's called leading from the front. The people appreciate, like I said, somebody's always looking at you. And these guys are always looking. They might not say nothing, but they're watching what you do. And if they know that you're in front of them, you're going to take care of them and protect them, that's leading from the front.
Boom. Absolutely amazing. If you guys are tuning in on the show right now, we're having a fantastic conversation with General Butler, who is the first black general in the Special Forces. So as you're watching right now, if you have any questions that you want to ask him, please type them in the comments, and we'll be addressing them as we're going through the podcast. So, and thank you for tuning in, and make sure you subscribe too, by the way. So as part of the book, do you have any specific processes or system that you have to help people develop their leadership skills?
Not per se in the book, but I talk a lot about leadership. Let me tell you about leadership. Everybody's not a leader. First off, we got to realize that everybody's not a leader, and some people aren't leaders, and they try to be, and it's unsuccessful. But you never want to be somebody else's leader. You don't want to. If I'm a leader, I don't want to be like you, because you're you. Your leadership style is going to be different than mine. So first off, you have to understand yourself as a person. And then you got to figure, okay, can I lead from the front? Everybody can't do it. Everybody's not equipped. Some people physically couldn't do what I did or whatever. Everybody can't do it. But you have to find out where your niche is. And once you find out your niche, you got to get in that niche. The other part about leading from the front is you got to make sure that you take care of your people.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that you said that was like fantastic is you have to lead by example. A lot of leaders, like, they think leadership is basically, hey, I'm sitting like on the pedestal and I give orders to other people. But the most important leadership is like when you were the first one to go scrub the toilets. So they see that you're doing that, and they're going to come down and kind of, because you're leading by example. They're going to respect you more. Mm-hmm. And the next time you tell them, hey, here's kind of what I would do, or kind of, leading them, they'll be willing to kind of do this.
And sometimes once they see you doing, you don't have to tell them. They do.
Yeah, absolutely. For the book, who are you reaching to? Like, who's your target audience?
Let me tell you, the target audience here for this book is young people. Folks who are out of college, heading to work, or young workers. because this book going to give you the guidelines. It's going to talk to you about everything we said today. It's going to talk to you about doing the hard jobs. It's going to talk to you about establishing relationships outside of your comfort zone. And that's the whole thing. You know, and this book is, I call it a guide. And my wife runs marathons. And my wife said something one time, and it's very true in this book. It says, she said, I don't care how fast you are. If you don't know the course, you're not going to win the race.
Boom.
And this book is kind of laying out the course for success. That's why I wrote it, because I wanted to take all that knowledge that I had gathered over the years, working from the military and in the civilian sector, put it in this book, make it small, because people will read it if it ain't too long. Make it small, let them read it, and now they can go kind of, you know what, I can do this. Figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, in your position as being a general, you were leading under extreme pressure. For anybody that is watching this, how do you lead under extreme pressure?
By maintaining your composure, maintaining your calm, and being confident in yourself and the decisions you're going to have to make.
Mic drop moment here. Right? Mic drop moment. Awesome. So we are nearing the end of the talk show. Over here, I have some questions that I have prepared for you. We'll walk through that, and then we'll talk about what the future looks like for you. The very first thing, if you had to go back to day one, what advice would you have given to your younger self?
I would have told my younger self to maintain my composure. Because when I was young, I know you find this hard to believe, but I had a hair-triggered temper. In fact, my temper almost got me kicked out of airborne school.
Interesting.
And what happened was, you know, I was in college, played football, I was in good shape. I was good shape. Went to airborne school, and you had to do 5 or 6 pull-ups. And you got there, and the guy would tell you, hang free, you'd hang and knock out the pull-ups. Well, the guy told me, hang free, I hung free, and I knocked out the pull-ups and dropped off the bar. And he said, no go. I said, what? No go. What do you mean no go? I just did them. I didn't tell you to go. And you know that pissed me off. So then I got back up there a third time. Now, you know, I done did 12 pull-ups already. So now I'm on the third time. And the 5th pull-up, I'm scuffling, man. You know, barely got it. No go. And I was about ready to knock his head off. So there was a good sergeant there. I'll call him Sergeant D. He was the senior airborne instructor. He grabbed me and pulled me over and said, oh, hold on there, Lieutenant. Come over here, talk to me, sit down. So then the commander came up. He was a lieutenant colonel, and I'll never forget this. Remember now, this is 1974. And he pulled me over and said, what's going on? So I told him. And he said, look, you know, I know, you know, where you came from. You know, I know that, you know, in your environment. And I'm looking at him like, you know, you think I'm one of them ghetto jokers. So I listened. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. He said, you know, so I'm going to give you a break this time because I know you aren't used to this kind of discipline, but can you do them? I said, yes, sir. So I went up there and had to take it again, but now I had a little rest, so I knocked out the 6 chin-ups, boom, and I went on through jump school and passed. But like I said, that, you know, my temper got me in trouble there. But the funny thing about that was he looked at me, knew I was black, saw I was about to whoop one of his guys' behinds, and he assumed I was from the ghetto. You know, okay. You know, and I took that assumption because, you know, it let me get through.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to take one step back here because I think that would be really cool to get your perspective from that. It's about the current war going on right now. Obviously, you know, Iran, Israel, and, you know, all of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have limited thoughts on it. I'm going to tell you why. I'm not involved in it. I didn't do the planning. I don't know the plan. I don't know their schedule or whatever. But the air campaign is good. I'll say that.
What do you mean by the air campaign is good?
You know, they're bombing. It's called the air campaign.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, they're destroying targets, so that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. What is it like for those people that are going? Obviously, I've never been in that situation. Like you've been to this situation. What is it like to be deployed and going to like war?
When you say what's it like, what do you mean?
Like as you going and experiencing those.
Well, you know, when people go, everybody's different. Everybody puts on that good front. I'm tough. Inside, people are praying. People are thinking about their families. People are thinking about what's going to happen when I get out there, because nothing is for sure. And the thing you have to do as a leader in this situation is when you're on that plane or whatever, heading wherever you're going, you got to walk around and talk to your guys. Hey, everything's going to be all right. How you doing? God, good. Hey, this is good. Everything's going to be all right. So it's your responsibility to bring them down as low as you can. You know, and if I say not to feel fear, I'd be lying to you. Because if they didn't feel fear, something was wrong with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, yeah. So second question, that was a little tangent over here. Second question, if you had to go back to day one, what is one thing you would have done differently throughout your journey as a general?
Day one as a general or as a...
Day one as throughout your career, like the very first day when you jumped and came in the military.
I would do very little differently, because if I did anything different, it would have changed my trajectory. You know, like I said, you know, I would have calmed my temper down a little bit, but I would have taken the same route that I took because that was my trajectory.
Yeah. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned over your career? It may have been like a book or like communication with somebody or a leader that has imparted some advice on you. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned over your career?
I had a retired, he's dead now, general. He was spent 2 years in a concentration camp. In World War II. And he came to the U.S., enlisted, became an E7, went to OCS, and he retired as a 2-star. He was my boss. He was my biggest mentor. If I could did anything different, I would have met him sooner, because he's the one who took me basically by the hand. He saw something in me, and he guided me down that perilous road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From your experience in being in the military, what are some of the things that you have learned that has served you well in the business world?
Oh, communications and work ethic. You'd be surprised how many people in the civilian business world, their work ethic is this. What time is it? It's time to go home. Is it time to do this? Yeah. And the thing, when I was running a couple organizations and hiring people, I looked for people with a military background, because I knew, for one, they had discipline. 2, they were capable of learning. 3, they understood being on time. 4, they understood what to wear. That took a lot of pressure off me as a leader, because military folks, you know, like I said, for young people, if you don't have a job, if you're working at McDonald's or Burger King, I would recommend they go in the military, because they're going to learn something. And number 2, they're going to get away from where they are and the group of people they're hanging out with.
Yeah. I guess an extension to that question, why would somebody want to join the military?
1, to get away from where you are. Most people in the U.S. never travel further than 200 miles from where they were born at. Number 1, you're going to get to see things. Number 2, you're going to meet people who are different from you. And that's where inclusivity comes in. Because I remember once I was a young lieutenant, and I had this good friend. He was a lieutenant too. And he told me one day, we were at the gym working out, and he said, you know, Remo, he said, you know, he's from Idaho, somewhere up there. He said, you know, I've never really had a black friend. I didn't know any black people where I lived at. You know, and he was serious. But that taught him something. It taught me something also. So you have to, so the military throws everybody in a bag, shakes you up, and you come out. And if you come out right, you've learned something from everybody in that bag. And I think that's good.
Yeah.
Also, like I said, it teaches you to be on time. You know, in the military, we say, if you're 5 minutes early, you're late. So it teaches you to be on time. It teaches you to complete the mission. It teaches you to be a self-starter. If you see something that needs to be done, do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you.
Boom. That is such a great skill set that a lot of people are missing nowadays. We were talking about earlier about like some young kids that, like, when you tell them about the military and they react
Yeah.
kind of differently. So if somebody is that young and they want to go to the military, what are some of the things that why would they want to do that, and what are some of the things that they can do to ensure that they get
By joining the military, you get a lot of you get benefits. If you stay in for a minute, a couple days, you got VA veterans benefit for medical, and you also have educational benefits. So if you're a young guy out in the street and you don't know what you're doing, where you're going, go in the military for a while. You know you're going to get 3 hots and a cot. So you got a place to stay and you're going to get food to eat every day. So while you're doing that, it takes a lot of pressure off that guy or girl, whatever she is, learning. So you go ahead and you do that, and then you learn something in the military. When you go in, it depends on what job you get. You learn a trade, and that's good for the outside world. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons to do that. And if you're thinking about it, look into it. Talk to somebody who's been in the military. Don't talk to your buddy Tyrone down the street. Talk to somebody who's been in the military and who can tell you actualities.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about the military today?
Oh, I don't know. But I do know that the military has changed. A lot of people think that there's just going to be a lot of yelling and hollering and shooting. That's not the case. And most people in the military are never involved in battle.
Really? Mm-hmm. Interesting. Like I would have thought like a lot of them.
No, most of them aren't. Remember, you got the combat arms guys, they're involved. But the rest of them are in a support or combat service support mode. So some of them are far, far from battle. Some of them be in America shipping supplies over.
Yeah. Did you ever have to deal with PTSD after you got out from the military?
Yeah, I got PTSD.
Yeah. Can you talk to me how you dealt with your PTSD?
Well, first, because I was a special forces guy, and we're hard as beaver's teeth, and there ain't nothing wrong with us. That was our attitude. And if a guy has a breakdown, he's weak. That was our attitude. My wife diagnosed me, and she told me, she said, you got PTSD. No, I don't. And sometimes I would be in bed, sleep, and I'd be fighting. I'd be fighting like a Mississippi field slave. And she would wake me up. And one night, I must have been really bad because she got out of bed, and she went and got a stick or something and poked my foot, woke me up. And I snapped to, and I'm ready to go to war. And I went to the VA, and the doctor said, "Yeah, you got PTSD, buddy." And it's a state of mind. And once you know you have it, you can talk to people, so forth and so on. But a lot of it is on how you control it with yourself. And again, part of my PTSD, I told you I had a quick temper, made it quicker, so I've learned to control that more. Yeah. If you say something to me, I might walk by you. I didn't say I would, I said I might walk by you. But before I wouldn't walk by you at all. And, so you have to learn what triggers your PTSD and what your reactions are to PTSD.
Yeah.
And am I cured? No, long shot, not cured. But I know what I have, what I am.
Yeah. What advice would you give to anybody watching this that might be dealing with PTSD?
Go see a therapist. Talk to him. Figure out what's causing it.
What do you mean by figuring out what's causing it?
There has to be an incident or two that caused you to have PTSD. Some people were in combat and they were ambushed. There was explosions and so forth. When they hear a loud noise, their mind will trigger back to that. That's why you see these guys out with these service support dogs. Sometimes things happen in our past and your mind triggers back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I have so much respect for you guys, and thank you for your service too, for obviously spending 29 years of your life in the military and all the great work that you've done as well for that. That's incredible. So how did you adjust from being from the military to the civilian life?
For me, it was very easy. I retired. Before I retired, I went on terminal leave. I had already signed a contract with a company in Iraq. I left my office, went home for the weekend. The next week I got on a plane, flew to Kuwait. From Kuwait, I went to Iraq. And so there was really not a big transition because I'm going from the military to almost a semi-military environment.
Okay, cool. So now we're moving to the legacy part of the show. Obviously, you have a strong legacy with all the things that you've done in the past and spending 29 years in the military. What do you hope Obviously, you've written the book. What do you hope this book will do for other people?
This book does two things. One, and I'll tell you why I wrote the book, my son and my wife. I don't talk about what happened when I was in the military. And I would have a lot of friends that were special forces with me. And these guys would come to the house and have a few drinks. And when they have a few drinks, they start talking. Well, my son, he's been listening to these guys since he was little. So he came to me and he said, Dad, he said, you know what? I said, what's that be? He said, you need to write a book. Really? I said, yeah. He said, I've heard a lot of stories about you, what you did, but you never say anything. And I'd like you to write a book so I will know what you did. And my wife had been pushing me to do it. So at that point in time, I sat down and thought about it. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I said, you know what else? I said, I can make this a legacy book because people who read this book will understand better how the business world works, how the military works, and they will understand better how they can advance and move forward. And that's all that is. And I hope that people read that book, learn from it, and it's my legacy. I wrote a paper about why black officers fail, and that was in 1977. And people still contact me today and say, hey, I read that article. Thank you very much. That had helped me. It did this for me. So that's what I want my legacy to be, helping people move up.
I love that. Going to expand on that a little bit. Why do you think black people fail in the military?
One, they don't establish relationships, like I said. And I think that's the biggest one. They do not establish interracial, across-the-board relationships. And you got to do that to be successful in the military.
Boom.
And that's the biggest reason. The second reason is because they don't establish the relationship, they don't get the good jobs.
Yeah. And obviously, if they don't get the good job, they don't get events, they don't get all of that as well. What was the biggest difference during your time? Obviously, the military has evolved. What was the biggest difference or hurdle that black people were facing during that time that you were in the military?
Well, and we're still facing it. And it's like I said, the biggest hurdle was getting the right job. You've heard the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, a lot of people don't get the right job because they don't know about it. Some people don't get the right job because the guy wanted his buddy to have that job, be honest with you. And when that happens, you got to speak up. You have a voice for a reason. You have to speak up and say, hold on there, buddy Roe. What does he have? What qualifications does he have that I don't have? Now, when you do that, you could be putting yourself in jeopardy. But you have to be willing to take that chance because you have confidence in yourself that you're right and they're wrong.
Yeah. One of the questions that I always ask everybody on the show is, what is their $1 million advice? What is that one advice that you would give to anybody if they wanted to change their life or like growing themselves or their business?
That $1 million advice from me would be very simple. Do the hard jobs. Don't take the easy way.
Boom. And what does that do if you focus on working hard versus kind of taking the easy way?
There's a couple things. One, when you work hard, people look at you. People understand. Like I said, every day you go out there, somebody's looking at you. When you do the hard jobs, people are looking at you. When you're always on time, people are looking at you. When your uniform or your clothes, your outfit is squared away, people are looking at you. How you carry yourself. You have to carry yourself like a man that's in charge. Don't carry yourself like a worker. Carry yourself like the man who's in charge.
Yeah. What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for you?
Next 3 to 5 years, well, like I said, my son is very important to me. Hanging out, going on trips with my wife, and doing a little bit of consulting is what I plan to do for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. For anybody that may want to get that book and learn about your story and all of the lessons and the legacy that you've left, from being the first Black U.S. Army Special Forces, how can they get a hold of that book?
That book is on Amazon. Lead from the front, and we have a website that'll take you straight to the point.
Awesome. Yeah. What do you know that website? We can add it as part of the comments over here as well. So we got to meet because of Eli,
Yeah.
who is a fantastic ghostwriting. Did you work with him to work on that book, or?
I worked with Eli on another book he wrote, and when I was doing this book, I called him up and said, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to do," and he was very gracious enough to accept.
Awesome. So you worked on a book with him.
Yes.
Awesome. What was that book?
I have to ask Eli.
Okay.
What it was, there was an organization called, oh God, what's it called? Black Ops. And they had some of us, we told our stories, and Eli interviewed us, told our stories, different stories, and Eli made it into a book. Yeah, it was called Black Ops. Yeah.
That was him over
Yeah.
here. Let's go.
Yeah.
Eli, let's go.
Yeah.
By the way,
Eli, can you tell them about how to order the book, the website?
Yeah, it's not out yet. The Black Ops book is not out yet.
no,
No,
this,
no,
this
this one.
book.
Oh yeah, just go to Amazon.
Yeah.
Amazon is where you get that book. So hit
From the front on Amazon, General Remo Butler.
Amazon, Lead from the Front, General Remo Butler. Head on over there to get the book. Any parting advice for anybody watching this?
Yes, especially for young folks. Couple things. One, always remember somebody is looking at you. Remember that everybody looking at you don't necessarily like you. Number two is be careful what you do on the internet, because that has a way of coming back to hurt you.
Yeah. What was the biggest piece of advice that you've received that has helped you grow from the ranks of the military?
Do the hard jobs.
You can see the recurring
Yeah.
theme over here, which is don't sit in your butt, do the hard jobs. Let's go. Awesome. General Remo Butler, such a pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, man, the
Thank you
pleasure
for
was all mine.
coming. And
Thank
it
you.
was like so great hearing your story, learning a little bit about like some of the lessons that you've learned from the military and, and what's next for you as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
There you have it. So there you have it. If you want to learn more about like some of the stories that we didn't get a chance to touch on, go to Lead from the Front on Amazon and purchase that book as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and definitely go to check his book. By the way, do you have a social media or any other pages that people can?
I'll let Eli talk about that.
Yeah.
Instagram. So tell me your handle.
Instagram, it's called Brig, B-R-I-G, General, General, _ Remo _ Butler.
Boom. There you have it. Go follow him on social media and connect with him. Thanks so much for being in the show.
Booyaka.
Booyaka. Let's go. That's so fire, baby. Let's go.
Let me get mine.